Hello and welcome to this check then of the A-Level Media Studies coursework element component 3. Today's video is going to focus on the theatrical poster, or specifically reviewing it, looking at what the exam board wants to see and how you're going to help establish brand identity by looking across between the theatrical poster and the DVD cover that you've been also asked to create. Let's take a look at then the bullet pointed list the exam board kindly provide for what needs to be in the theatrical release poster. You can see it needs an original title and tagline, at least one main image, an element of narrative, for example disruption, enigma or character types, a release date, production company logos, film's website and social media logos, quotes from critics or reviews, and lastly a billing block. Many of these elements are of course very similar to the DVD cover itself, but as it specifies, you can't use the same image on your theatrical poster as you did on your DVD. Let's then begin to look at the elements and where you might find them on the average theatrical release poster. This there's an example from It Chapter 2, a fairly recent film taken from the horror genre. As we go through these bullet points, look at your own theatrical poster design or concept art, and can you locate where you've included each of these details. We have then first off an original title, in this case positioned right at the top of the page in the centre. An original tagline, in this case featured at the bottom of the poster below the central main image. The main image itself there, which in this case shows characterization as well as an element of enigma. And there we have then the character's face peeking through the red balloon there, indicating a sense of mystery or sense of unease or a sense of tension as what this character is capable of and what he's planning on doing. And lastly we have the release date, company logos, etc., which are all at the bottom of this theatrical poster, positioned in really small grey font across the bottom, almost so you don't actually really notice them until you're looking for them. Obviously they're a lot less important than the title and the tagline, which is why they're positioned at the bottom and indeed in that greyed out font. Now let's take a look then at what that would the theatrical poster element would be graded for. You can see for a C grade, the products address all requirements set by the brief, and you can see that it needs to use conventions relevant to the genre that you're creating for, and should provide an excellent realization. This would be for the A grade even. For the B grade, we'd expect slightly less, but it's a good realization of the brief that's likely to engage and position intended audience. But again, all the bullet points needed in the theatrical poster would be present and correct. And lastly, for the C grade, you'd expect a satisfactory realization of the brief that's likely to engage and position the intended audience through generally appropriate mode of address. And as you can see, most elements of the brief are there, with one or two small details missing from the overall product. In short then, the exam board are looking for three things to grade your particular product. It must look as much like an actual theatrical poster as you possibly can. It must link to the target audience that you are required to create for, and it must include the details of the brief the exam board specify. On the screen now you can see three examples of three theatrical posters taken from Year 13 students. This is part of their original coursework submission and it is their final draft you can see before you. You can see many of the elements taken from the brief are present and correct, but the good, satisfactory or excellent realization might be something you'd study. How many of these actually look like a real theatrical poster? When you look at these images, do you think, yep, that's a film I'd want to go and see, or do you think that that's clearly something done at home on a home PC by an individual student? The closer it actually is to the actual theatrical poster, as you could tell from the previous screen, the higher the mark would then go. You can see Evasion on the left hand side with its interesting central image there. The BBC Films logo there is a little bit sort of copy and pasted on compared with an actual theatrical poster, and there isn't as much to go on there as you'd hope to engage our interest. So for example, the narrative or characterization there is lacking because I'm left with very little to go on to actually say something about the film that I might be expected to go and see. You can see the middle one, Psycholation. Clearly a horror film there using the handprints and the sort of clear element of Psycho in the centre there, which links back to films like Friday the 13th, Valentine's Day Massacre, etc. You can see the title is clearly in a font that's suited to the genre, and you've got the tagline underneath, we can all go a little mad sometimes. And on the far right, you have Silk Woven Hell with its central image there in the background, and a font that does link to the idea of silk and spiders. But the background image is a very basic image there that could easily be done at home and doesn't really suggest something that is a proper theatrical product. You can see the sizing of the release date, the stars down the side, and of course the billing block, all present and correct. But you might question the size of some of those elements. Are they as important as the title, or should they be a bit smaller or a bit better positioned to suit the needs of a real theatrical poster? Equally, the font for "It is told that spiders feel no emotion" at the top there seems very basic and almost as an afterthought, that little sentence added. Secrets will be revealed is strangely positioned right at the top of the screen, as that seems to be the first thing I should look at. But then I'm immediately left thinking that's the central image and wondering quite what secrets those are, and not in an engaging way, in simply a slight confusion between what the film's actually about. As soon as I start thinking it through, I start thinking, well, Silk Woven and Hell all indicate eerie spiders or something from the devil. In the background, though, we seem to have a hand with spiky fingernails or knife-like fingernails. Well, I'm not quite sure how it links to the idea of spiders that are referenced in the title. All three images here then are around about C-grade theatrical posters. They do the basics, they cover the brief, but there's a question mark over the successful realisation of an actual theatrical poster in each case. Now let's look at some of the accompanying DVD covers linked to each of those theatrical posters. First off, we have then Silk Woven Hell. You've got a much more sort of mysterious image there of the boy in the picture. The layout is a lot stronger for the DVD cover, and you can see in the artwork for the back of the DVD some references to the spiders that are inferred in the title. We also have some devilish imagery there that links to hell. The colour scheme links to hell, the reddish kind of colour, and you've got like the sinking sunset in the background, which again seems to link to the idea of hell. I also look at the image and see the spider webs in the font there, which links to those spiders, which of course links to this idea of things being woven. We also have a spider on the spine, which indicates exactly the same thing. So you have these kind of ideas of spiders creeping in various elements of the design here. Now let's bring up the theatrical poster, and you can see although the font is the same for both, there's a lot less detail in the theatrical poster. It feels or looks a little bit more rushed than the DVD cover. The layout isn't quite as strong. And equally, the main image there is very different between the two. You've got this almost killer-esque hand in one, but you've got this scared boy in a forest in the other. So you'd be hard pushed, other than the main title itself, to know this is exactly the same film we were looking at. Example number 2 is from our Evasion film. You've got quite an interesting design there for the DVD cover. You can see it's got sort of split images and this girl with a knife, almost seemingly standing in a ditch or sitting in a ditch, awaiting something to approach. I'd assume her reality is warped, which is why you've got that kind of staggered image effect in the background. And I can clearly tell this is going to be about a woman fighting for her life or evading her killer, as the title might suggest. I like the font of the tagline there, "Believing is seeing," and I like the repetition as it being reflected above and below the title. Quite an easy effect to establish, but one that immediately piques my curiosity of exactly if there's hidden secrets to this girl that we're going to unpick during the watching of the film. The background of the back of the DVD is yet again our forest. We've got our stars there and our blurb and billing block, and you've got our thumbnail images all present and correct, which replicate the idea of it being a killer film, a psycho film, and a girl fighting for her life. Let's bring up again the theatrical poster, and you can see a marked difference between the two. In this case, you'd be very hard pushed to know this is even the same film. We have actors' names only present on one of them. The font has changed between the two texts, and the image and even the presentation and structure and style of the image is very, very different between the two. In fact, you would easily think they are different films entirely. So in terms of brand identity, this despite having a fairly strong theatrical poster and fairly strong DVD cover, they aren't part of what appears to be the same film, which is a concern when we look at the product as a whole, or the coursework as a whole. To overcome some of these ideas then, some of these issues with those two examples we just looked at, please explore the following points when thinking about your own design. What common elements, pictures or fonts are used in your DVD cover and the theatrical poster? Why have these been chosen to represent your genre? What's the overall effect? What are we left thinking your film's going to be about? What other media texts these remind us of that you studied in your research? And how do these elements link to your target audience and production company values? Once you explore these 4 questions, you can then begin to think about how to improve your design and think how best to incorporate into your own genre and your own brand identity. Now let's take a look at Cyclation with its DVD cover and of course its theatrical poster. Immediately there you can see much more brand identity going on, lots more horror tropes appearing in both, and the images are very, very similar. Certainly if this student was presenting their coursework to me, I would suggest a slightly different image for the DVD and the theatrical poster, because you aren't allowed to use the same one. Having said that, there's no doubt it is the same figure in each, the same killer tools being used, and indeed the same sort of horror codes being used of the red and the black and the blood prints. We have a slightly different font being used in the theatrical poster compared with the DVD cover, so I'd suggest the same font being used in each, and obviously you've got your tagline slightly different in each one as well. I'd suggest the same tagline in each one to again secure brand identity and make those elements a lot stronger. Presentation wise, both are strong and both can easily be linked to sort of 80s style horror films of that era, particularly the slasher genre of horror. I think the downside might be that on the spine of the DVD you can clearly see this student has ripped off the Psycho graphic from the film Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock, and I'd wonder why the film Psycho appears on the spine, whereas the title of the film is clearly something different. I think this is probably an oversight. I think the student simply got carried away with the kind of font being used. But that's aside, this is a C-grade coursework folder and uses many of the elements dictated by the brief to a fairly secure effect as an overall product. You can see underneath the DVD cover I've written up how brand identity is established and linking to the codes and conventions of the genre this student is choosing. I have established the horror genre brand by using codes such as black and red to indicate the gore of the film and the mysteries surrounding, literally, the killer. To create brand identity, I'll use the same colour scheme across my marketing. The symbolic code of a bloody handprint is taken from classics of the genre, such as The Shining, to emphasise the body count used in the film and the death of innocent lives. The main character is deliberately shot in the style of Friday the 13th, holding tools that are clearly linked to the 80s slasher films, such as Friday the 13th and Halloween. The pose and weapons are also reminiscent of the genre to intimidate and frighten, whilst the hoodie indicates crime and the teenage audience. The classic horror tropes are repeated throughout in different ways to show cross-text convergence and exaggerate the key elements of my chosen genre. The 80s references that are repeated will appeal to fans of the genre as well as the target market who were brought up in the 1980s. You can see there then that's how I'd write it up for my aims and intentions, deliberately saying why I designed it the way I did and what tropes or stereotypes of the genre I'd want to continue across all my different platforms. Please have a go at writing something similar up of your own about your own DVD and theatrical poster, making clear to the exam board what links there are across and why you've chosen those for your particular target audience. Thank you very much then for listening to this review of the theatrical poster element of component 3, focusing on particularly brand identity. Thank you very much for listening and good luck with your own media studies coursework.